Okay, so hello, and welcome to Driving Productive Virtual Meetings. My name is Mark Ward. I'm a consultant with the Mentor Group, managing partner here, and yes, it's really good to be with you today. We're living in strange times. I've been in this game and in organizational effectiveness for close on to 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. It is definitely something quite different. It was been running workshops a long time, and it was 15 years before I ran my first virtual event. And I thought, how difficult can it be? It's a piece of cake. I've been running these workshops for forever, and I'd be looking at a screen. So theoretically, it should be easier, right? I mean, this is exactly what I thought. And yet it was anything but. The difference between running a successful virtual event and running a face-to-face workshop, it's like chalk and cheese, literally. And I remember distinctly when I reached my hand forward to toggle the keyboard. I remember looking down and seeing my hand tremble and thinking, well, my hand has never trembled like this for a very, very long time. And yet I was completely outside of my comfort zone. So it does require a different mindset, and most certainly a different skill set and even toolkit to run these great meetings. So it's a brave new world we live in. I'm talking to clients all the time. I'm speaking to friends all over the world. Many people are quite ungrounded. They're very, very unsettled by this. They're unsettled by the new technology, the whole new context. And I will also tell you, and it does need to be said, that there are people that have taken this challenge that we're in and are using it to their full advantage. They're making the best of it. They're engaging with clients like they've never done before. So really making the best of what is a very bad situation for some, and certainly worse for some than for others. So it is a brave new world. Many of us, in fact, have held dreams of what it would be like to work from home, right? So you think you're going to work from home, and it's going to be that. It's going to be idyllic and peaceful, and you're going to be able to just have your own space, and it's just wonderful. You really just, and so we have this ideal in our head, and then that's the reality. And so, and I'm hearing far more of this as the reality, by the way. As a business, we're in a privileged position of supporting a lot of big companies in different places across the world. So we're almost a radar or a magnet at the moment for feedback about what's going on in the world from a kind of digital disruption point of view, and this is what it's like for most people. So it isn't the easiest for some, but there are certainly ways to mitigate some of this craziness. And today we're going to talk about how you can really create powerful and impactful virtual meetings. Okay, this webinar is, in summary, designed to build your capability and inspire action in order to make your virtual meetings engaging and valuable. They have to deliver on the value and on everybody's investment in time. Otherwise, what is the point? Kindly put your questions to Matt Webb. He is also in attendance today. Matt works for Mentor. He has been with the business for a number of years. He heads up our operations. He also happens to be an exceptionally good presenter and facilitator of these online meetings. And I'm going to welcome his input today. Matt, please say hello.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to have some Q&A at the end. So you will have an opportunity to ask some questions, and we'll have that discussion. Just some basic housekeeping, I should say. Please be present, stay connected, and participate fully. What we are going to cover today: barriers to effective virtual meetings. There are definitely some barriers in our way, and there's some do's and don'ts and things that we can do differently and do well in certain cases. And so we're going to work on some of those barriers. We're going to talk about some brain and engagement limitations. We are dealing with the human brain, and as powerful and as much of a supercomputer as it is, within these contexts, it does have its limitations. We're going to discuss 5 golden rules. They really are, if you were to distill all the best practices around getting the most out of these meetings, we recommend 5. And underneath those golden rules, we've got some principles and some key actions that you can take today and in the weeks ahead in order to make this successful. I'll introduce a meeting planner to you. There are ways to plan and to structure a virtual meeting, and because it's very much in our wheelhouse, should I say, we've learned how best to structure it. And so what I'm going to share with you comes from years of trial and error and a really powerful way to structure these meetings to make sure that everybody gets the maximum amount of value. And then, of course, we're going to deep dive into some tech tools and some best practices. And finally, some specific actions that you can take. Okay, just a very quick check-in with Matt. Matt, do you have anybody that has posed any questions thus far?
Nope, not yet. Thank you.
Okay, so what is your biggest frustration with regards to virtual meeting? I'm going to introduce you to a little tool that we'll use today and that you can use in your own virtual events. And it's a simple poll, incredibly easy to set up, certainly in the application we're using. And so we're going to call up the poll. I'm asking you to give me your single biggest frustration with virtual meetings. I'll show you the results in a sec. Please go ahead and choose. Which is the biggest frustration that you have? We'll close the poll in a bit, so don't take too long, and I'd like to share those results with you.
God, just over half of you have answered the poll so far, so I'll give it another 10 seconds or so, and then I'll close the poll down. Once you've chosen your area, click on Submit. Good, okay, Mark, I'll close the poll now.
Okay.
And share the results.
Well, look at that. Unreliable technology and poor message transmission is the first issue that jumps out at me. And I feel your pain, friends. It is very, very difficult. I'm quite blessed right now to have really strong like an internet speed, fiber, but it wasn't always like that. And if you don't have it, it can cause a lot of frustration. We've also got time management there, lateness and overrun, so that's clearly an issue for you. And then, of course, a lack of structure and logical flow, I think, coming in at third. Matt, what do you make of these results?
Yeah, interesting. We've got a couple of other ones that are coming through on chat as well. So Sarah says the challenge is lots of people end up talking over each other. So I think if we can cover that in the content as we go through. Yeah, for me, I'm with the 24% actually. Time management, late overruns is always a bit of a frustration. One thing that we definitely find with running virtual meetings is quite often they're shorter in duration. So, which means you have to be more succinct, you have to be more on time. Many people are also back-to-back meetings, and we're going to cover that point later on. So if you get anybody who's running late for a meeting, it compresses that time even further. So for me, that would be one of the frustrations that I'd share with 24% of you on this call.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's move on, shall we? So there we go. Okay. So just again in summary, today's outcome specifically concentrated to support you to deliver powerful virtual meetings that people love to attend. That is quite a tall order, I know, but I've really seen some fantastic virtual meetings where great camaraderie is built, insights are shared. It is entirely possible, and we're going to share with you how to get there. How do you do it? You've got to eliminate 5 barriers and follow the 5 rules. Understand, number 1, and respect the limitations of the human brain. Again, our hardware is limited. Let's understand what it can and can't do. Ensure the maximum participation, rule number 2. 3, plan with precision. 4, master your technology toolkit. And 5, proactively manage your audience. There is a skill involved here. Managing your audience, making sure everybody stays engaged. So this is the territory we're covering today. Number 1, and let's crack on and just get right into it. Understand and respecting the limitations of the human brain. What do we mean by that? Okay, number one, multitasking is a neurological impossibility. Why is that relevant? Because every single time your participants in your virtual meetings multitask and they do something else, whether they're reading an email, checking their Twitter feed, responding to something, they are disengaging from the task at hand, and they're disengaging from that meeting. They can't concentrate on two. People who multitask really well, I know a few of them, and I'm sure you do too. Those people are forced by the limitation of their brain to actually switch focus entirely from one task to the other. And of course, when you're switching focus from one to the other, something is lost in that process. And if your meetings are boring, and if I'm stating the bleedingly obvious here, forgive me, but if your meetings are boring, people will multitask. And so, yeah, you want those meetings to be as stimulating, as interesting, and even as invigorating as possible. Number two, communication consists of 55% body language and facial expression, 35% tone, and 8% content. So when you're having a conversation with somebody, you are getting that communication message, and you are deciphering it, shall we say. Only 8% of that comes from content. Everything else is body language and facial expression, etc. So you can imagine that in a virtual context like this, there are some limitations. In fact, in virtual meetings, up to 80% of our perceptual abilities are disabled unless we know what we're doing. So again, video is extremely important. Things like limiting distractions in the background, very important. Things like mixing up your mediums so that it's not monotone and dry and one person just going on and on and on. So really mixing it up, getting audience participation, engaging the people in the room, etc. Many of the tips that we're going to cover today are important. So the bottom line then is the digital domain misleads our senses. What are the actions for you to take? Use video at all times. This is quite controversial for some people. They feel shy. They wake up in the morning and their hair's not done and the makeup's not done, or they, or whatever. You're embarrassed about what's in the background. This is something that I think we've all got a contract with each other. When we're running a virtual meeting, it's video at all times. I can't overemphasize the importance of this. It builds engagement. It keeps everybody's focus and attention. If you're off video and let's say on mute, you could literally be doing anything. And the likelihood of you concentrating on the task at hand is small. Use video at all times. Minimize background distractions. You'll notice that in my background, there's a white wall here. I could have chosen some of the digital backgrounds. In fact, I tested some of them ahead of this call. I said, should we use a digital background or should we use a white wall? And the call was, let's use a white wall. This way you're focused on me. You're not concentrating on, whatever it is in the background. So minimize that where possible and use real-time feedback. As a facilitator or a host or a chair of a virtual meeting, you want to be engaging and interacting with your audience at all times. Give them feedback, request and solicit feedback from them so that it is interactive. I've seen a lot of rookies run meetings, and it's kind of a one-way traffic scenario. They are not interacting, and people naturally zone off or they multitask. Matt, before we move on to the next principle of ensuring maximum participation, do you have any questions?
Just one question came through, which was around where do we find virtual backgrounds, various different places in Zoom. When you've got your camera icon on the bottom of the screen, and there's a little up arrow next to it. If you click on that, you can then go in and choose a virtual background. A couple of things to bear in mind with virtual backgrounds. You need a big contrast between what you're wearing and what's behind you, and try and keep a plain background. It's quite important if you are using a virtual background. You can literally put any picture behind that you want. In Teams, you can blur the background as well. But go into whichever tool you're using, play around with it, and just make sure that it works ahead of any call or meeting that you have. So that was the first one. Another point that came up earlier was around bandwidth, particularly on video, because at the moment, many of us are working from home. In my house, there's 5 of us. 3 of whom are teenage sons who, as I'm sure you can imagine, are using a lot of bandwidth. So we just got to be mindful that when we are going into rather important meetings, that we know who's on, what bandwidth we've got available, so that we don't get slowed down in the quality.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, in terms of choosing a virtual background, you can pretty much select anything. If you go into your application, there'll be some default images that you can select, or it should give you, at the click of a button, an opportunity to go in and navigate into your computer and choose from your own image library. So, and if you're presenting to a client, something that I did only yesterday is I went in and I found a logo of my client, and I loaded that as an image, and I chose my client's logo as a background image, which is something that they quite appreciated. So again, it gives you the opportunity to be creative. Just a personal preference. A background image of you with the beach and a waving palm tree in the background, probably not the best idea. So just be sensible, but have fun nonetheless. Principles. Okay, let me just go back here. We're talking about ensuring maximum participation. This is a rule that again is vital. It's important to getting the right sort of outcomes that you're looking for. It's important to keeping people engaged, and really just having a successful meeting. The alternative to this, or the converse to this, is where individuals are not participating. And again, as I said, if it's a one-directional flow of communication, expect people to zone out, expect them to multitask, and you won't get the right experiences. So we are going to cover planning in a bit as well. There's a way to plan for this, by the way. Okay, principles. When people contribute to success, they invest in success. So this is a simple principle. You're running a virtual meeting. If you're wanting people to really invest in the success of that meeting, get them to contribute in it. I'll say more about that in a bit. When people don't actively participate, they disengage. I think that point's been made a couple of times today, and so I won't repeat it, but it is an important one. And then small responsibilities equal heightened focus and deeper learning. So by giving people responsibilities within that meeting and having everybody contribute, it will sharpen their focus, it will heighten everybody's learning and engagement, etc. Okay, so from an action point of view, break your agenda up. You've got a meeting, it's an important one. Let's say you've got 40 minutes planned. Chunk up your agenda, into different parts, and sometimes it even helps to have it, to have it quite granular, because the more granular you break up your agenda, the more tasks you can allocate. Give each person a small role. Remember something, and this is an important point to make. Many of us, even in a virtual context, will have a natural sense of confidence. We won't be shy or afraid to speak up. But the truth is that many people will feel shy and awkward around and within a digital medium for the first time. And so be mindful of those quieter voices. If you give those people, typically those that you might wouldn't expect to hear from in a normal meeting, give them a small role, bring them in and have them participate. That is a gift not only to them, but to the entire group. So give each person a small role, and then use the collaboration tools. We'll talk through later on in the session what tools are available to you. I'll share with you what we use at Mentor. This is not rocket science, not complicated. It can be daunting. I have actually, if I'm going to share with you, just come off of a virtual session with a client, and I immediately detected that there was anxiety around using the tools in some people, and that is perfectly understandable and normal. As good as some of these tools like Slack and like Zoom and like Adobe, etc., have become, they are still daunting. So use the collaboration tools and get good at them. Matt, before we go into plan with precision, let me ask you any questions or comments or observations.
Yeah, so 2 questions that are coming in, Mark. I'm just, by the way, I'm looking up, guys, because my second screen is above me here. So 2 questions I've got. The first one is, my challenge is how to really make sure everybody is listening and contributing to the call when the video is off, without having to call them out like we used to at school. So what tips have you got for making sure that everybody is listening, everybody is engaged? Yeah,
that's a really great question. So what I do to make everybody feel engaged is, again, is I will have everybody pre-primed with specific contributions that they need to make. If somebody knows they need to contribute to a meeting in some small way, they will not goof off. The other thing is you draw up images of everybody. So you've got video, you can see all the faces, and then the better you get, the easier it becomes to just take a look and to scan faces and scan activity and to see what people are doing. And then what I would sometimes do is, if I'm noticing somebody's somebody's not with us anymore and you can see they're doing something else, I will call on them by name. And when they hear their name, it's amazing how the focus immediately comes back. You could also you make a comment around, what's in somebody's background. You could say, Jill, I'm noticing there's a beautiful plant in the background. And again, I mean, that's a friendly, non-threatening way to say, hey, I see you, and please bring your attention back into the room. Matt, do you have anything to add on that?
I think the other thing to bear in mind is that we've got the appropriate people in the meeting in the first place. So if people are there and you've made the point about breaking the agenda up, making sure people have got a reason for being there, a purpose for contributing, rather than having too many meetings which are full of people who either should be there rather than need to be there. That's one thing I would call out. The second question that I've got that's come in, Mark, is really about the opposite to the people who are quiet. How do we keep people who are noisy, who want to speak all of the time? How do we make sure that they don't take all of the limelight in the meeting?
Yeah, that is a really, really great question. And it's one that I've had a fair bit of experience in. There are always those dominant voices. There are people that take up a lot of airtime, that have strong opinions. And the advice that I would give you is, you've got to welcome that strong energy, because it serves a valuable purpose in a group context. So welcome it, and don't shame somebody for being strong and for being vocal and for taking up a lot of airtime. That said, you've got to hold up a mirror. And so if somebody's dominating the conversation, if they're taking up a significant amount of airtime, I might not call them out in the first meeting. Okay, so here I'm going to be specific. I might not call them out in the first meeting, but what I would do at the end of the first meeting is I'd say to them, listen, I notice that you're a strong voice. There are some quieter voices. I just want to hold up the mirror a bit and just say, it would be really great if you could essentially dial it back a bit, and that we could welcome some of the quieter voices so that we can have a better distribution of contribution and of communication in the group. So that's one idea. If, however, by the way, you're feeling like, listen, I've got to ask this person to pipe down, you do also have the opportunity to mute them as the meeting host. So that is a little trick. I think that's been done to me once or twice, Matt. I'm not sure about that, but you can mute somebody. So that is another tactic. Matt, I'd like you to weigh in on this, given that I think that this is something you've got to manage quite a bit.
It is, we have, we're fortunate to work around many people who've got big personalities, big egos, and when you get 20 or 30 of those in the room, sometimes it can be quite difficult. I like a couple of the examples that have been pulled in the chat. If you have a look at those, set ground rules, make sure that everybody gets a fair contribution by not talking over. So simple principles, simple ground rules that work. As a facilitator, making sure that everybody is engaged, checking in with them, making sure that people have got an opinion. So not calling people out as such, but making sure there's an even spread around the room. That's what we do at Mentor, and it works really well so that everybody's got a contribution into the meeting. Critical point, as I mentioned earlier, though, make sure people are there for a reason. Make sure that they've got a contribution to give, and that works really well. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to 3, plan with precision. This is an important one. Principles, planning sharpens. It sharpens you as the meeting host. Don't rock up to a meeting unplanned, unprepared, and expect to just wing it. Everybody will feel it. They will feel the impact. They will feel your shortcut. So plan diligently and know that it sharpens you. Participative planning primes and aligns. What do I mean? Again, we spoke about chunking up the agenda, giving small responsibilities to people. And we have found that when people plan participatively, and there's an agenda that's flying backwards and forwards and everybody's contributing to it, etc., it just gets everybody ready for the meeting. It aligns them around what's the end in mind, what do we want to achieve, etc. So go ahead and do that, and then plan for outcomes that result from actions to be taken on the back of decisions. That sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but if you break it down, we're planning for specific outcomes. So each meeting, we are wanting certain outcomes as a consequence of that meeting. What are the actions that we need to take in order to achieve those outcomes? And then in order to get to actions, we're going to have to make some decisions. So what are those decisions that we're going to need to take? I'm going to show you a meeting planner. Now, just before I show this to you, it might overwhelm you with its data, and it's kind of it may look a little complex. It is not. I will explain this to you in a second. Okay, distribute planning ownership is an action you want to take. Begin with the outcomes, and again, that will become a little bit more intuitive and make more sense as I show you the tool. And 3, repeat and reinforce. The planning principle is best done, and it should be done initially. Lots of very, very detailed planning, constructive planning, but you find over time you get into a rhythm, you get in sync with each other, and the planning responsibility or liability, some might say, starts to decrease over time as you get better and better. So let me share this with you. Let me just go back there. I apologize. This is a meeting planner that we use, and I recommend that you use it also. Okay, we're starting with outcomes. What are the outcomes that we want to bring about? Okay, so don't go into a meeting as the host without a clear appreciation, an understanding, and a set of priorities. What are the outcomes, the end in mind, which is an expression that we use. Once you are clear on that, you can almost work in reverse order. So you'll see this little arrow. This arrow is pointing backwards. It's starting from outcome and working backwards. We would focus on the outcomes as point 1. We would work backwards and say, well, what are the actions that need to be taken to achieve those outcomes? What needs to be decided for an action to take place, or for action to take place? So that's the set of decisions that we anticipate we're going to have to go through. What's the input? What data are needed to support the decision making? What do we need to look at? What are the files? What are the, what's the data that we're going to have to work through on this meeting, whatever it is, in order to make decisions, to create action and outcomes. And then, of course, before that, as we've said, who's responsible for what, and what is the focus? That meeting planner is really, really effective. May strike you initially as somewhat counterintuitive because you're starting with the end in mind. Some people have said to me, well, why don't we just start here and look forward? And you're just going to have to, take my word for it. You try it, you'll start to understand and appreciate its magic. Starting with the outcome and working backwards is a very effective way to plan your meetings. Before we go into the next section, Matt, any questions that we need to deal with before we move on?
Yeah, just actually 2 questions now. What, in your experience, are the top 3 tips for planning a meeting, and what must you avoid? So top 3 tips first, and then secondly, what must you avoid?
Okay, interesting. Top 3 tips. What would be my top 3 in terms of planning a meeting? Again, it's going to be, what are the outcomes that we're looking for? You go into too many meetings and the outcomes are not clear. So again, and I don't want to reiterate everything I've just said in terms of the tool, but number 1, be very, very clear about the outcome that you want. Number 2, as you are planning, it's good to get a sense of what you're expecting from each individual. What is the actions that you're going to take? It's also important to plan time at the end of each meeting to consolidate, wrap up those actions, so that is absolutely clear. Too many meetings end and they're a little bit fuzzy and people are not clear about who needs to do what. So that's really important. And then the other thing that I always recommend is anything that's data rich or that's kind of difficult to get through, you don't really want to do that on the meeting, send that as pre-reading. So that's always an important one. Send a pre-reading so people can do that difficult stuff or time-consuming stuff. Perhaps it's a little dry, do that up front. So those would be the 3 things. Matt, anything to add?
Nope, that's fine for now, thanks.
Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to move on then. Master your technology toolkit. What do I mean by that? What is the virtual meeting application you currently use? This is the second poll. I'm curious to know what kind of tech you use. Matt, if you would please pull up that poll. Give us a sense of what you are using. That is poll number 1, Matt. We need poll 2. Matt, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. The poll should be live. Can you see it?
can see, I can see one.
Okay.
I can see poll number one.
You relaunch. What I'm going to do for this poll, if you can let me know
There we go.
if you
Perfect.
can see
Got
that
it,
now.
Matt. Yeah,
So for those of you who can't see the poll, many of you can see the poll, by the way. The question is, what is the virtual meeting application you currently use? So if you can't see the poll, the options here are Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, Google Hangouts, Slack, Join Me, GoToMeeting, Adobe, or other. So if you, only if you can't see the poll, if you put that in your chat, just so we can see, we've got about half of you have answered so far. Just over half of you. PA, you've said WebEx, Barbara, Zoom, Andrew, Teams. Okay, so we've got a good mixture. I'm going to close the poll down in 10 seconds. And I'll share you the results, Mark.
Okay, Zoom is dominating. By the way, this was not intended to be a plug for Zoom at all. It is our choice, as well as Teams, but that is quite something. Okay. Okay, so when I'm talking about collaboration tools within Zoom, I think it's pretty safe that we can use Zoom. I think most of you will apply, at least find that relevant and applicable to you. Matt, if you could pull that down.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just waiting for my poll results to disappear, and then I'm going to assume yours have as well.
Okay, I'm not sharing now, Mark.
I'm still seeing the poll results.
Okay. Cleared on my screen, so
I wonder.
Close down on yours and carry on.
Okay, great. Can I carry on?
Yep.
Okay. So at Mentor, again, it's policy of always using video, and in all of your virtual meeting application tools, you will have the option of video. Of course, always use it. It brings everybody in the room, keeps everybody on their toes. It minimizes the impact of those perceptual filters we discussed, and so get everybody used to it. It is definitely the way to go. We always use chat, which is really useful. There's always commentary, flying backwards and forwards in the chat section. And so, what I do is I'm often asking people, I'll ask a direct question to the participants, and I'll say, I don't want you to respond. I don't want you, to respond verbally, but respond in the chat box, please. And then as those responses come in, I will filter what it is that I want to call out, or what it is that I want to mention. So it gives me more control as the host, as opposed to hearing just everything that everybody has to say, right? So use the chat, obviously share screens. All of these technologies give us the opportunity and the options to use those screens. We always do. And then, the polling function, which is what we've used deliberately to showcase to you what that's like. It is incredibly easy to set up. So it's my suggestion is to use the poll. And again, it kind of mixes up the mediums, which is good and useful. And sometimes you're wanting to pose a question to the group. You want to give them the opportunity to respond anonymously. Okay, so that's what it does. It gives you the opportunity to respond anonymously. And you're wanting to get a kind of a sense check of what everybody thinks and feels, but you don't want to put people on the spot of having to call it out personally. So it's a great tool. Use it. Whiteboarding. Some of us in Mentor Group are really, really good with whiteboarding. We use it very effectively, and so that does give you a great option. It really can bring an event to life. Breakout rooms, again, very, very easy to set up if you're the host. You basically go and you can randomly assign people to groups, or you can do it yourself. So it's kind of it's a random assigning, or you can choose who goes into what group. And then, of course, as the host, you can just dip in between, in and out, a bit like a genie. You'll go into the different meetings, and you could contribute, check that everything is on track, check the discussion is flowing, etc. So use that. Use the reactions. Again, that's just another handy tool in many of the applications. Get people to talk to you. And then the good thing is you can track attention in Zoom. So at the end of your meeting, you can very quickly, at a few clicks, and I won't explain how to do it now, but you can check, how was everybody's attention? And it calls people out by name, by the way. It's quite extraordinary. And you can get a sense from, how much attention did they give, how participative were they. You can then pull that up on a report and you can distribute that. And of course, that also really ups the ante. If somebody knows that they're going to be called out for poor participation and the data suggests they were goofing off, that again is gonna, it's a powerful tool just to ensure engagement and focus. Actions to take. So you're unfamiliar with Zoom, or you're unfamiliar with running a virtual meeting and you're a little bit daunted. Just go into the client, the Zoom client on your computer, set up a meeting. Nobody else needs to be on there, and go and play around, get comfortable with the settings, navigate, and just get comfortable, play around with the options, and then finally, of course, invite a colleague for feedback. That's exactly what I've done many times. What's the background like? What's the lighting like? Are you comfortable with this? What's the audio like, etc. And so once you've done that, you're kind of good to go. And just doing that preparation is useful and handy. Matt, before we go into proactively managing your audience as our final piece of input, any questions?
Yeah, just a tip of something that I use when I'm doing a Zoom meeting, particularly with with a client or a customer, whichever you wish to term it. Use your whiteboarding as you come in towards the end of the meeting. Of course, use your whiteboarding throughout the meeting. If you capture all the actions, the owners, and by when on a Zoom, and you click on save, it shares onto your desktop. It's a great way to send out very quickly a meeting summary by attaching the whiteboard image into the email. That works really well. Barbara, you've raised a good point about when you are sharing screen or you're doing something collaboratively on the screen, do you switch your camera off? So I work off a slightly smaller laptop, and if I'm doing a whiteboard, for example, and I get too close, frankly, nobody wants to see me up close. So what I'll do is I'll always signpost what I'm going to do first. So I'll call out, I'll say, guys, I'm going to switch my camera off while I'm doing the whiteboard, so that everybody's aware that I've not just disappeared, and then I'll switch it back on soon afterwards. I think it's really important that you call these things out because people just physically can't see you. And then the other question I've got is from you, Jose. What do you do when someone's on mobile? Best practice, guys, is when you've got a meeting going on, is to call out some of the key principles up front. For example, try not to be moving if it's an important meeting. So be in front of your laptop or device. Try to call in over IP if your bandwidth is good enough. Because when you're using tools like Zoom and you use breakout rooms, if you've got your online self and then you've got a mobile self on the same screen, it puts you in different rooms. And whilst that is all right to facilitate that, to fix it, it puts you in different rooms. So what I would do is I would just send out some simple principles. Be stationary, call in over the internet if you can, make sure that you're visible, your camera is on, and so on. If you have to be virtual and you have to be on mobile, just call it out. I would definitely discourage that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. Moving on, proactively manage your audience. Remember this? So this is what you're managing, okay? And you need to manage for, and you need to mitigate against, because this kind of craziness and chaos is definitely what is going on in the background. People are people. They're easily distracted. They're often bored, and they're always multitasking. And so your job as a meeting host is fundamentally to manage your audience, bring them in, and ensure maximum participation and engagement throughout. So that is the principle. And the actions to take, we recommend starting a little early and ending on time. What do I mean by starting early, and why would you do that? It's something that we do all the time. When we run our internal meetings, we would typically come in at about 10 minutes before, and it's called a water cooler moment. So it's just, you come in, you shoot the breeze, you swap stories, bit of banter, a bit of laughter, a bit of joke, but just some bonding, just some connectedness that occurs in those moments. And that's really useful. I think that one thing that I know for sure is that the time that we are in now, our core needs of connectedness and relating and bonding and just kind of the closeness of our relationships are under fire as we work from home and we're isolated from people. So starting a little early is just great. It just gives everybody that chance to just connect. Allow for some time for social connection. That is the point that I just made. So allow that, and then contract with the group up front. So there was an earlier question which I thought was interesting. You've got somebody who's incredibly dominant. They take up a lot of airtime. And so how do you, as a meeting host and as a facilitator, make sure that the quieter voices get an opportunity to speak, make sure that everybody's perspective is heard, so that at the end, you know, there's a degree of cohesion that's been built, and you know, as opposed to a online meeting that's dominated by strong personalities, and everybody kind of goes away and it just doesn't feel great. Contract up front. So again, I've learned to do this both in live workshops as well as in online forums. I would say, right, this is what I'm expecting from the group. Guys, we've got, you know, X amount of time. If you do share, please keep it short, keep it brief. We always say, be bright, be brief, be gone. So that is a good rule of thumb. And then don't interrupt each other. Don't talk over each other. This is much easier to manage in a live workshop scenario. I'm not in any way kind of naive about that, but you do with practice get good at this. Again, you've got a mute button, so you can manage it to some degree. But again, you just call it out and say, listen, guys, let's not interrupt each other. Let's give the speaker an opportunity to finish. And you do that in a contracting situation up front. Best for success. You know, it seems incredibly straightforward, but I'm telling you that if I was sitting here talking to you today in my pajamas and my hair was kind of messed up and it's going to manifest itself in how I come across in this meeting. And so again, using video is an important one, because if you're on video, there is some pressure on you to look sharp, but kind of dress up for it. And it just makes a difference. It's a difficult impact to articulate in words, but it makes a difference. Watch for the mute button. It can be a blessing and a curse. What that means is if somebody's in a noisy environment, and this often happens, where we get muted, I get muted, or I mute people, they're sitting and they're dialing in out of necessity from a restaurant or whatever, then the mute button is important. But the mute button is definitely there's an element of disengaging when you're on mute. So use it sparingly, use it when you need to, but for the most part, people shouldn't be on mute. Keep the audience on their toes. You know, if you do notice, as I said earlier on, if you notice people are not paying attention, they're goofing off, call them out by name, ask them for their opinion, a pointed and direct question at somebody. You know, Jill, what do you think about X? Will guarantee to snap her straight back into the room. So keep your audience on your toes. That's a skill that you're going to get good at, and a skill that you need to learn. So before we go into our learning summary and wrap up, I'd like to ask Matt. Matt, have you got any interesting questions that we need to attend to before we move on?
Yes, I've just dragged my chat box down into my main screen here. So this is a great example of where I'm going to get a bit close to the screen because my eyes aren't what they used to be. Christian made a good point that if you've got a mixture of dominant and less dominant personalities, it is actually easier to control that in virtual meetings by active participation, by making sure people have got a clear purpose for being there. Some of my mentor colleagues will tell you that I will say to them before going into a meeting, what is the purpose for me being there? What do you want me to contribute? And you'll be amazed at how often you ask that question and people haven't got a clear answer. So to make sure that self-management is also there is really important. I love the one that's just come through on question, by the way. I learned to suggest use the word done or over when someone is done saying something. Do you ever suggest that? Never tried it. We've done it in a playful way, you know, by saying over. And whether it'll work in your meeting, it really depends on your organization. Best thing is give it a go. You know, if it works in your company and your culture, happy days.
And more importantly, Matt, if I can just interject, if it works for the military the world over, then maybe there's something we need to learn. So why not give it a go?
I'm just conscious we've got about a minute of your time left, Mark, if you could summarize off, please.
Okay. So everybody, thank you again for your time. Someone asked me if, what are the most salient tips? What would you call out as being the most important things? And I thought through that. I anticipated that question. We've spoken about understanding and respecting the limitations of the brain, maximum participation, planning with precision, using the toolkit, and proactively managing your audience. Of all of those tips and all of those rules that we've covered today, use your video at all time would be number one. Use real-time feedback. So give real-time feedback. Just because it's virtual does not mean that you can't do so. Use the real-time feedback and solicit it. Give each person a small role before your meeting. That is definitely the way to go. Use the collaboration tools at your disposal. Don't be scared of the tech guys. Give it a go. Practice with it. Even if it's a little clumsy initially, it certainly was with me. Very few people will come into this domain and just be slick and smooth from the get-go. So, be kind to yourself. Expect to make some mistakes. That's okay. The planning is really, really important. Begin with the outcomes. I can't overemphasize that more. And then just finally, on a softer note, on these meetings, allow time for connection. Remember that many of us will be feeling quite alone and quite isolated. So use the opportunity to connect with your friends. That would be my final point. And so I will say to you, we've covered the questions. I've been diligent to build those in as we've gone along. And I appreciate your time and wish you every success in this challenging time. It's been a privilege to contribute to everybody. And I wish you well, Godspeed. And I hope to talk to you again in the future. Thank you.